The rain began before sunset, a slow curtain drifting over the carnival grounds on the edge of Millfield. By 8 o'clock, the midway lights shimmered through sheets of water, turning the muddy field into a blur of color and reflection. Families hurried between rides, teenagers gathered beneath awnings, and thunder rolled across the distant hills. 16-year-old Ethan Mercer barely noticed the storm. He moved through the crowd with his hood pulled low, checking his phone every few minutes. A stream of unanswered messages filled the screen. His expression carried the restless tension of someone waiting for a conversation that could change everything. Near the Ferris wheel, a few classmates called his name. "Ethan, come ride with us." "Maybe later," he replied with a distracted smile. The smile disappeared the moment he looked back at his phone. Across the carnival, a figure stood near the game booths, partially hidden by the rain. Ethan spotted the person and immediately started walking in that direction. Whatever had brought him there, it clearly mattered more than the rides, music, or flashing lights surrounding him. By 11:30, the storm had become violent. Vendors began closing early. Families headed home. The carnival slowly emptied beneath pounding rain and sharp bursts of lightning. At 11:47 p.m., a local mechanic named Walter Briggs stepped outside a food trailer to secure a loose top. Through the rain, he noticed two teenagers arguing near the parking area. One was Ethan. The other appeared to be a teenage girl. Walter could not hear every word over the storm, but he heard enough to know the conversation was heated. "You lied to me," Ethan shouted. The girl stepped closer. "Keep your voice down. I'm done keeping secrets." A crack of thunder shook the air. Walter glanced away for only a moment while wrestling with the top. When he looked back, the pair were moving toward the dark tree line beyond the carnival lights. That was the last confirmed sighting of Ethan Mercer. The next morning, Ethan failed to return home. His mother, Laura Mercer, called friends, neighbors, and classmates. By afternoon, panic had replaced hope. "He would never leave without telling me," she told the responding officer. "Something happened to my son." Police initially considered the possibility that Ethan had run away. Teenagers disappeared for a day or two more often than people realized. Laura refused to accept it. As hours became days, search teams combed fields, woods, and abandoned buildings. Volunteers distributed flyers. Social media filled with photographs of Ethan's smiling face. The disappearance consumed Millfield. Among those attending community prayer gatherings were Daniel and Rebecca Harper, respected residents known for their charity work and quiet generosity. Their teenage daughter, Claire, stood beside them during a candlelight vigil, saying little and attracting almost no attention. At that stage, the Harpers appeared no different from dozens of other concerned families. By the third day, exhaustion settled over the town. Search crews expanded into areas previously overlooked because of flooding caused by the storm. Shortly after dawn, two volunteers followed a drainage channel running beneath an isolated service road outside town. One of them noticed a shoe lodged against debris. They climbed closer. Then they saw the body. The call reached police within minutes. As sirens echoed through the grey morning, investigators sealed off the drainage tunnel. Ethan Mercer had been found, and the injuries visible through the rushing water made one terrifying fact impossible to ignore. This was no accident. Someone had wanted Ethan silent, and had succeeded in the darkness that night alone. The discovery of Ethan Mercer's body shattered the last fragile hope that had lingered over Millfield. By noon, investigators had transformed the drainage tunnel into a major crime scene. Officers moved through the area collecting evidence while reporters gathered behind police tape. Rumors spread faster than facts. Every conversation in town seemed to begin and end with the same question. Who killed Ethan Mercer? Detective Ryan Holt, the lead investigator, focused on Ethan's final hours. Witness interviews, phone records, and surveillance footage slowly created a timeline. Most of it was ordinary. One detail was not. Ethan had been exchanging messages with someone in secret. A forensic review of his phone uncovered dozens of deleted conversations. Recovering them took time, but when technicians finally succeeded, a single name immediately stood out. Claire Harper. The revelation stunned investigators. Claire was 18, well known in town, and the daughter of Daniel and Rebecca Harper. The family's reputation for kindness and community service made the connection difficult to believe. Yet the messages showed an undeniable pattern. The two had been communicating for months. Some conversations were friendly. Others were emotional and intense. Several messages hinted at arguments, broken promises, and secrets neither wanted revealed. Most alarming was a message sent just hours before Ethan vanished. "Meet me tonight. We need to end this." Detectives quickly obtained a warrant and brought Claire in for questioning. She appeared calm when she entered the interview room, though dark circles beneath her eyes suggested she had barely slept. "Did you meet Ethan at the carnival?" Holt asked. Claire hesitated. "Yes." The admission immediately changed the direction of the investigation. She explained that Ethan had asked to see her privately. According to her account, they argued briefly near the parking lot before she left alone. "When was the last time you saw him?" Holt asked. "Near midnight," Claire replied. "He walked away. That was it." "Why didn't you tell anyone about the meeting?" Claire lowered her gaze. "Because people would assume the worst." Outside the station, news of the interview spread quickly. Local media seized upon the story. Within hours, social media transformed Claire from an unknown teenager into the center of public suspicion. The pressure intensified when more evidence emerged. Several witnesses reported seeing Ethan arguing with a young woman shortly before midnight. None could identify her with certainty, but their descriptions were similar enough to attract attention. Meanwhile, Claire's parents stood firmly beside her. "She is innocent," Daniel Harper told reporters outside their home. Rebecca appeared shaken but determined. "Our daughter did not kill anyone." Despite their confidence, investigators continued digging. Friends described Ethan and Claire as unusually secretive. Some believed they were romantically involved. Others claimed they hated each other. No one seemed to know the full truth. As speculation grew, so did hostility. Anonymous messages flooded the Harper family's mailbox. Strangers shouted insults when Claire appeared in public. Online groups labeled her a murderer before any charges had been filed. Millfield wanted answers. Claire became the target of its anger. One evening, investigators executed a search warrant on the Harper property. Officers examined electronic devices, personal belongings, and family vehicles while neighbors watched from a distance. Claire remained silent throughout the search. Hours later, a forensic technician called Detective Holt to a detached garage. A vehicle registered to Claire had produced a positive result during preliminary testing. The sample was immediately sent for confirmation. The following afternoon, the laboratory report arrived. Holt stared at the document for several seconds before speaking. The substance recovered from the trunk of Claire Harper's car matched Ethan Mercer's blood. And suddenly, the town's prime suspect was no longer just a suspect. As officers prepared their next move, reporters crowded the station entrance. Inside her bedroom, Claire sat motionless, unaware that the evidence tightening around her would soon place her life on trial. The months between Claire Harper's arrest and her trial felt endless for the people of Millfield. Every new rumor became front-page news. Every television report repeated the same question: had the town's most shocking murder already been solved? For Ethan Mercer's family, the answer seemed obvious. For Claire's family, it was far more complicated. On the morning the trial began, crowds gathered outside the courthouse before sunrise. Reporters lined the entrance. Protesters held signs demanding justice for Ethan. Others stood nearby insisting that Claire deserved a fair hearing. As cameras flashed, Claire stepped from a black sedan between her parents. Daniel and Rebecca Harper looked exhausted. The past year had drained nearly everything they possessed. Legal fees consumed savings accounts that had taken decades to build. Rebecca had sold family jewelry. Daniel had taken extra work wherever he could find it. Their lives revolved around one goal: keeping their daughter out of prison. Inside the courtroom, tension hung over every seat. The prosecution wasted little time establishing its theory. According to District Attorney Linda Graves, Claire had become obsessed with Ethan after a secret relationship collapsed. She described a young woman unable to accept rejection, someone whose emotions had spiraled into dangerous territory. She was angry, Graves told the jury. She was humiliated. And she had the opportunity to make Ethan Mercer disappear forever. Photos of Ethan appeared on screens around the courtroom. His smiling face contrasted painfully with the crime scene images that followed. Several jurors looked away. Ethan's mother quietly cried into a tissue. The prosecution called witness after witness. Friends described arguments between Ethan and Claire. Text messages revealed emotional exchanges filled with accusations, apologies, and jealousy. Walter Briggs testified about seeing Ethan arguing with a girl before midnight at the carnival. "I couldn't see her face clearly," he admitted, but the height and build matched Claire Harper. The statement sent murmurs through the courtroom. Then came the evidence everyone had been waiting for. A forensic analyst explained how Ethan's blood had been found inside Claire's vehicle. The prosecution presented it as the final piece connecting her to the murder. Yet the defense fought back aggressively. Claire's attorney challenged the reliability of witness memories and questioned the handling of evidence. Experts argued that while the blood was troubling, it did not prove Claire committed murder. No fingerprints linked her to the tunnel. No DNA connected her directly to the scene. Most importantly, there were no eyewitnesses to the killing itself. Reasonable doubt remained. When Claire finally took the stand, the entire courtroom seemed to lean forward. She appeared pale and fragile. Her voice shook as she answered questions. "Yes, Ethan and I knew each other. Yes, we argued that night. Yes, I met him at the carnival." The prosecutor stepped closer. "And after that argument, I left." "You expect this jury to believe that?" "It's the truth." The questioning continued for hours. At several points Claire broke down crying. The prosecution accused her of manipulating sympathy. The defense portrayed her as a frightened teenager trapped inside a nightmare. Still, despite intense pressure, Claire never changed her story. Not once. Days later, closing arguments arrived. The prosecution painted Claire as a monster hiding behind a mask of innocence. The defense argued that suspicion was not proof. When the jury retired to deliberate, Millfield held its breath. One day passed. Then another. By the fourth day, tension consumed the town. People gathered outside the courthouse waiting for news. Inside, Claire sat between her parents as the jury filed back into the courtroom. The foreperson stood. Every eye followed him. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have." The room became completely silent. On the charge of murder, the foreperson read the decision. "Not guilty." For a moment nobody moved. Then gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. Ethan's family stared in disbelief. Reporters rushed toward the exits. Rebecca collapsed into tears while Daniel wrapped his arms around Claire. The jury had not declared her innocent. They had simply found that prosecutors failed to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. As Claire walked free, some celebrated while others called the verdict a betrayal of justice. Standing near the back of the courtroom, Detective Ryan Holt watched her leave. Something still felt wrong. The evidence had been incomplete, but his instincts remained unchanged. The courtroom verdict echoed through Millfield long after Claire Harper walked free. Some called it justice. Most called it a failure. Outside the courthouse, reporters chased Claire and her parents through a storm of questions. Ethan Mercer's family left through a separate exit, devastated by the outcome. Detective Ryan Holt remained unconvinced. The jury had spoken, but the town refused to let the case die. For Claire, freedom came with a price. The days following the trial became unbearable. Every trip outside turned into an ordeal. People stared openly at grocery stores. Neighbors whispered behind curtains. Strangers pointed phones at her whenever she appeared in public. No matter where she went, she carried the label of suspected killer. Daniel and Rebecca Harper stood beside their daughter through it all. "We know who you are," Rebecca often reminded her. But even those words seemed less powerful with each passing month. Friends who had attended family barbecues for years slowly disappeared from their lives. Invitations stopped arriving. Holiday cards never came. People who once shared laughter with the Harpers now crossed the street to avoid speaking to them. The family became isolated. Daniel suffered professionally as well. Several longtime clients quietly took their business elsewhere. Nobody explained why. They didn't need to. The trial had poisoned everything. Rebecca lost her position on multiple community boards after complaints from residents who believed she should never represent local organizations. Years of volunteer work vanished almost overnight. Still, neither parent abandoned Claire. They chose loyalty over reputation, love over acceptance. When threatening letters began arriving at their house, Daniel installed security cameras. Some messages accused them of helping a murderer escape justice. Others were far darker. One envelope contained a photograph of Ethan Mercer. Across the image, someone had written, "Blood stays forever." Rebecca threw it away before Claire could see it. The harassment continued for months. Eventually, Daniel made a difficult decision. "We can't stay here anymore." No one argued. Less than a year after the verdict, the Harpers packed their belongings and left Millfield behind. They moved hundreds of miles away to a quiet town where their name meant nothing. For a while, the change helped. Life became calmer. The phone stopped ringing with anonymous threats. Reporters disappeared. Neighbors greeted them without suspicion. Yet the past remained close enough to touch. Internet searches still connected Claire's name to Ethan's murder. Occasionally, someone recognized her from an old news story. Rumors resurfaced. Questions returned. The nightmare never fully ended. As years passed, Claire changed dramatically. The outspoken teenager who had once challenged investigators became withdrawn and cautious. She rarely discussed the trial. Loud noises startled her. Unexpected visitors made her anxious. Many nights Rebecca found her sitting awake in darkness. "Can't sleep?" she would ask. Claire usually shook her head. Sometimes she appeared frightened. Other times she seemed lost inside memories she refused to share. Rebecca interpreted these behaviors as signs of trauma. After everything Claire had endured, the emotional damage seemed understandable. The family adapted to their new reality. Years slipped by. Slowly, routines replaced chaos. Then one autumn evening, nearly a decade after Ethan's death, Rebecca climbed into the attic searching for old tax records. Dust-coated forgotten boxes stacked against the walls. She spent nearly an hour sorting through faded photographs and family keepsakes. Near the back corner, she noticed a small wooden chest hidden beneath blankets. She didn't remember seeing it before. Curious, she pulled it into the light and opened it. Inside lay a black leather journal. Rebecca immediately recognized Claire's handwriting on the cover. Her pulse quickened. The journal looked old enough to date back to the period surrounding Ethan's death and the trial. Carefully, she opened the cover. Then she stopped. The pages inside waited silently. Answers might be hidden there. Secrets too. For several moments she stood frozen, staring at the journal in her hands. Finally, she closed it. Without reading a single page, Rebecca returned the book to the chest and shut the lid. Some doors, she believed, were safer left unopened. At least for now. 10 years had passed since Ethan Mercer died. On the surface, the Harper family had survived. Their new town knew little about the trial that had once consumed national headlines. Daniel had rebuilt his business. Rebecca had returned to part-time community work. Their modest home sat on a quiet street where neighbors waved without suspicion and children rode bicycles until sunset. To outsiders, they looked like a family that had healed. The truth was far different. The scars had simply become easier to hide. Claire, now 28, still avoided discussions about Millfield. She rarely spoke about Ethan. Whenever the past surfaced, her expression hardened and she immediately changed the subject. Rebecca had learned not to push. For years, she convinced herself that silence was part of recovery. Then everything changed during a simple family dinner. It began with an innocent question. Daniel mentioned attending a business conference in a nearby city. One of the speakers happened to be a retired detective discussing cold cases and wrongful accusations. The topic triggered an unexpected reaction from Claire. "I don't want to hear about detectives," she snapped. The room fell silent. Rebecca looked surprised. It was just a conversation. No, Claire said sharply. It's always the same conversation. Daniel attempted to calm her. Nobody is accusing you of anything. Claire stood abruptly from the table. Maybe not out loud. The anger in her voice shocked both parents. Years of buried frustration seemed to erupt at once. Rebecca finally lost patience. We spent 10 years defending you. Claire stared at her. I never asked you to. The words landed like a slap. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Claire grabbed her keys and stormed out of the house. The front door slammed behind her. Rebecca remained frozen at the table. That night, long after Daniel had gone to bed, she found herself unable to sleep. Her thoughts kept returning to the journal hidden in the attic. The black leather book she had discovered months earlier. The one she had never opened. For years she had avoided questions about the past. Now she found herself unable to ignore them. Shortly after midnight, she climbed the attic stairs. The wooden chest sat exactly where she had left it. Rebecca opened it slowly. The journal remained inside. Waiting. This time, she carried it downstairs. Her hands trembled as she opened the first page. The earliest entries appeared ordinary. Claire wrote about school, friendships, and everyday frustrations. But as Rebecca continued reading, the tone gradually changed. Ethan's name began appearing more frequently. At first the entries sounded affectionate. Then they became possessive. Rebecca felt unease growing inside her. One passage read, "He thinks he can ignore me whenever he wants. He doesn't understand how much I've sacrificed for him." Another entry was worse. "If Ethan keeps treating me like this, one day he'll regret it." Rebecca paused. The words felt disturbingly intense. She turned more pages. The journal painted a picture she had never seen before. Claire described secret meetings, emotional confrontations, and a growing obsession with Ethan's attention. The entries swung wildly between affection and hatred. One day she loved him. The next she despised him. Rebecca's stomach tightened. This wasn't the frightened victim she remembered from the trial. This was someone consumed by anger. Someone struggling to control powerful emotions. Then she noticed something strange. Several pages had been removed. Not accidentally. They had been carefully torn out. Entire sections of the journal were missing. The gaps appeared during the weeks leading up to Ethan's death. Rebecca flipped through the damaged pages again. Who removed them? Claire. Someone else. The missing sections suddenly felt more important than everything she had already read. Her pulse quickened. She continued searching. Near the back of the journal, she discovered one final surviving entry written shortly before Ethan disappeared. The handwriting appeared rushed and uneven. As Rebecca read, her breath caught in her throat. The sentence began normally. Then it shifted into something darker. Something terrifying. The final line read, "The night I finally made him pay." The entry ended there. No period. No explanation. Nothing. Rebecca stared at the unfinished sentence for several moments. The room felt colder. For the first time in 10 years, a terrible possibility entered her mind. What if the town had been right all along? And what if the daughter she had spent a decade protecting was hiding far more than anyone ever imagined? Rebecca barely slept after reading the journal. 4 days, the unfinished sentence haunted her thoughts. The night I finally made him pay. She tried convincing herself there had to be another explanation. Perhaps Claire had written the words in anger. Perhaps the missing pages contained context that changed everything. But deep down, doubt had already taken root. For 10 years Rebecca had defended her daughter without hesitation. She had sacrificed friendships, reputation, and peace of mind because she believed Claire was innocent. Now, for the first time, she wasn't sure. She told no one about the journal. Not Daniel. Not Claire. Instead, she began quietly revisiting the past. Her investigation started online. Late at night, she searched archived news articles, court documents, and interviews connected to Ethan Mercer's murder. Details she had ignored years earlier suddenly seemed important. She printed timelines, highlighted witness statements, compared testimonies. The deeper she looked, the more questions appeared. Several weeks later, Rebecca traveled alone to Millfield. The town looked smaller than she remembered. Many businesses had changed ownership. Familiar streets felt strangely distant. Yet the memory of Ethan's death still lingered beneath the surface. Some residents remembered her immediately. Their reactions ranged from uncomfortable silence to open hostility. Rebecca ignored them. She had not returned for forgiveness. She had returned for answers. Her first stop was Walter Briggs, the mechanic who claimed to have seen Ethan arguing with a teenage girl on the night of the carnival. Walter was older now. His hair had turned grey. When Rebecca introduced herself, surprise flashed across his face. "The Harper family," he said quietly. She nodded. After a long pause, he invited her inside. Their conversation lasted nearly an hour. Walter admitted his testimony had never been as certain as reporters claimed. "I saw Ethan," he said. "That part one no. And the girl?" He hesitated. "The storm was terrible. I couldn't clearly see her face." Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. At trial, the public had treated Walter's account as fact. Now it sounded far less reliable. The uncertainty disturbed her. Over the following weeks, Rebecca tracked down additional witnesses. One former carnival employee admitted investigators never interviewed everyone who had been near the parking area that night. Another witness recalled seeing a dark vehicle leaving the area shortly after midnight, a detail that received little attention during the original investigation. None of the information proved Claire's innocence. But neither did it prove her guilt. The contradictions continued growing. Meanwhile, Claire noticed changes in her mother's behavior. Rebecca became distracted. Distant. She often disappeared for hours without explanation. Conversations felt strained. Simple questions produced cautious answers. One evening Claire confronted her. "What's going on with you?" Rebecca looked up from the kitchen table. "What do you mean?" "You've been acting strange for months." Rebecca forced a smile. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Are you investigating something?" The question struck Rebecca like a warning. She quickly denied it. But Claire didn't appear convinced. From that point forward, tension settled between them. Small disagreements became arguments. Long-standing trust began eroding. Claire grew increasingly suspicious. Rebecca became increasingly secretive. Neither knew how to bridge the widening gap. Eventually, Rebecca decided there was one person she still needed to speak with. Detective Ryan Holt. The lead investigator from Ethan's case had retired several years earlier. After some searching, she located him living alone outside Millfield. Holt seemed surprised by her visit but agreed to talk. At first, the conversation remained polite. Then Rebecca mentioned the journal. Everything changed. The retired detective studied her carefully. "You really want the truth?" he asked. "More than anything." For several seconds he remained silent. Then he stood, walked to a filing cabinet, and removed an aging folder. The expression on his face unsettled her. "There was something we never presented at trial," he said quietly. Rebecca felt her heartbeat accelerate. "What do you mean?" Holt looked toward the folder in his hands. Evidence existed that could have changed the entire direction of the investigation. Rebecca stared at him. The room suddenly felt very small. Then the retired detective delivered words that shattered everything she thought she knew. "Someone made sure it stayed hidden." Rebecca sat motionless as Detective Ryan Holt placed the old folder on the table. The words he had spoken continued echoing through her mind. Someone made sure it stayed hidden. For years she had believed the trial exposed every important fact surrounding Ethan Mercer's death. Now, as Holt opened the worn folder, she realized how much had remained buried. Inside were interview notes, photographs, and copies of phone records collected during the original investigation. One document immediately caught her attention. The recovered messages between Claire and Ethan were far more extensive than those presented in court. Whole conversations had never been introduced as evidence. Rebecca began reading. At first the messages appeared affectionate. Ethan and Claire exchanged jokes, private memories, and promises to meet in secret. It quickly became obvious that their relationship had been far more serious than anyone publicly admitted. They were not casual friends. They had been romantically involved. Rebecca felt her chest tighten. For 10 years she had never known the full truth. Neither teenager had revealed the relationship during the investigation. Claire certainly never mentioned it to her parents. Yet the messages left little room for doubt. The deeper Rebecca read, the darker the story became. Their relationship was filled with emotional highs and devastating lows. One week they expressed affection and dependency. The next they exchanged accusations and threats. Ethan often withdrew from Claire without explanation. Claire responded with desperation and anger. Several messages made Rebecca deeply uncomfortable. "You can't ignore me forever. Maybe you'll finally understand how much you've hurt me." Another exchange revealed Ethan manipulating Claire's emotions whenever she attempted to distance herself. Neither appeared innocent. Both seemed trapped inside an unhealthy cycle of obsession and control. The relationship had become a battlefield long before Ethan died. Why wasn't this shown at trial? Rebecca asked. Holt sighed. Parts of it were. Not all of it. Why? The retired detective hesitated. Because certain evidence disappeared before prosecutors finalized the case. Rebecca stared at him. Disappeared. It wasn't officially lost, Holt said carefully. Let's just say some people had strong reasons for keeping parts of the story buried. The answer only created more questions. When Rebecca returned home, she carried copies of several documents. 4 days she secretly studied them. The more she learned, the more uncertain she became. Her daughter looked increasingly unfamiliar. Meanwhile, Claire noticed her mother's growing distance. Conversations became tense and guarded. Rebecca avoided eye contact whenever Ethan's name surfaced. Claire responded by becoming defensive and suspicious. One evening the tension finally erupted. "What are you hiding?" Claire demanded. Rebecca froze. "Nothing." "That's a lie." Claire's voice trembled with anger. "You're treating me like everyone else did." Rebecca struggled to answer. The guilt she carried was becoming impossible to conceal. Before she could respond, Daniel entered the room. His expression suggested he already understood more than he admitted. After Claire stormed away, he turned toward Rebecca. "You need to stop this." The statement caught her off guard. "Stop what?" "Digging into the past." Rebecca stared at him. "How do you know about that?" Daniel looked away. For several moments he said nothing. His silence was answer enough. "You've been following me?" Rebecca asked. "No." "Then how do you know?" His face tightened. "Because people have called me." The admission sent a chill through her. Daniel knew about her investigation. Worse, he seemed terrified by it. For the next several days, arguments consumed the household. Daniel repeatedly insisted that reopening old wounds would destroy their family. Rebecca insisted she deserved answers. Neither was willing to back down. Then another secret emerged. While reviewing old records from Millfield, Rebecca discovered references to several unexplained meetings that occurred shortly before Claire's trial. One name appeared repeatedly. Walter Briggs. The witness who claimed he saw Ethan arguing with a teenage girl at the carnival. Curious, Rebecca continued searching. Eventually she located a forgotten note attached to an archived investigator's report. The brief entry mentioned an unrecorded conversation between Briggs and a member of Claire's family. Rebecca read the line twice. Then a third time. Her hands began shaking. The date matched only weeks before the trial began. And the family member involved was not Claire. It was Daniel. Staring at the document, Rebecca felt the ground shift beneath her. For 10 years she believed her husband had simply defended their daughter. Now evidence suggested something far more troubling. Daniel Harper had secretly met with one of the prosecution's most important witnesses before Claire ever entered the courtroom. Rebecca confronted Daniel the night she found the record of his secret meeting with Walter Briggs. The paper lay on the kitchen table between them like evidence in a trial neither of them could escape. "For 10 years, she said quietly, "you let me believe you told me everything." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He looked older than she remembered, worn down by something heavier than exhaustion. "I didn't lie to you," he finally said. Rebecca let out a bitter laugh. "You met a key witness before the trial. You kept it hidden. That's not honesty, Daniel." Silence filled the room. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, but inside the house everything felt still and suffocating. Daniel sat down slowly. "I didn't think it mattered," he said. "That's not an answer." He rubbed his hands together, as if trying to warm them. "I met Briggs because I was scared." Rebecca's expression hardened. "Scared of what?" Daniel hesitated. Of what would happen if Claire went to prison. The confession hung in the air. Rebecca shook her head slowly. "That's not how justice works." "I know," Daniel said quickly. "I know that now. But back then, I wasn't thinking like that." His voice lowered. "I was thinking like a father." Rebecca studied him carefully, searching for certainty in his words. "What did you tell him?" she asked. Daniel exhaled. "I told him to be sure. That's all." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "Be sure about what?" "That what he saw, what he thought he saw, needed to be absolutely clear. No doubts. No uncertainty." Her stomach tightened. "You influenced his testimony." "I didn't force anything," Daniel said defensively. "I just made sure he understood how serious it was." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, suddenly feeling cold. "You helped shape the case." Daniel didn't deny it. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Years of trust felt like they were cracking beneath them. Finally, Daniel whispered, "I never believed she was guilty." Rebecca looked at him sharply. "Then why interfere at all?" "Because I knew how fragile the evidence was," he said. "And I knew if everything came out unclear, they would destroy her anyway." Rebecca's voice rose. "So you decided to control the truth?" "I tried to protect her." "That's not protection," she snapped. "That's manipulation." Daniel stood abruptly. "I did what I thought was right at the time." "But it wasn't right," Rebecca said. The words hit harder than either of them expected. Daniel turned away, pressing his hands against the counter. "I was terrified," he admitted quietly. "Every piece of evidence, every headline. It felt like the world had already decided she was guilty. I thought if I didn't step in, we would lose her forever." Rebecca watched him, seeing not just a husband, but a man crushed under fear and regret. "And now?" she asked softly. Daniel didn't answer. Because neither of them had an answer anymore. The house felt different after that conversation. Smaller. Colder. Claire sensed it immediately. She began withdrawing again, interpreting every glance and silence as suspicion. Conversations between mother and daughter grew sharp, fragile, unstable. Rebecca found herself questioning everything she had rebuilt. Every certainty now felt compromised. One evening, as tension reached its peak, Daniel received a package. It arrived without return address. He opened it at the kitchen table while Rebecca watched. Inside was a small digital recorder. And a single note. "No more secrets." Daniel's hands trembled as he pressed play. At first there was only static. Then voices. Distorted. Urgent. Familiar. Rebecca froze as the sound of that night, the night Ethan Mercer died, began to unfold inside their kitchen, pulling them back toward a truth neither of them were prepared to face. The kitchen was silent except for the faint crackle of the old device. Daniel stood frozen, his thumb hovering over the play button, while Rebecca stared at the recorder as if it was something dangerous. Then he pressed it. At first, there was only wind. Heavy rain. Distant thunder. The same storm that had swallowed Millfield on the night Ethan Mercer died. A shaky male voice emerged through the distortion. "Ethan. I told you not to come here tonight." A pause. Then a second voice, sharp, emotional, unmistakably Claire. "You said you would listen to me. You promised." The sound of footsteps, uneven and close to the microphone. "Ethan again, lower this time. This is exactly why I stopped answering you." Claire's voice broke through. You can't just disappear from my life and expect me to be fine. The argument escalated quickly. The recording captured overlapping voices, rising tension, breath turning uneven with panic. Rebecca leaned closer without realizing it. Daniel's face had gone pale. Ethan's voice sharpened. Claire, go home. I'm done with this. No, she said immediately. You don't get to decide that. A sudden crash echoed through the recording, something hitting metal or wood. Then silence for half a second. Followed by heavy breathing. Claire whispered, almost pleading. I did everything for you. Ethan's tone changed. Anger replaced restraint. That's the problem. I never asked you to. The words cut through the recording like a blade. Claire's breathing became erratic. You're lying, she said. You said I mattered. I said a lot of things, Ethan replied coldly. That doesn't mean they were real. The rain intensified in the background, drowning parts of the conversation. Claire's voice rose again, trembling now. Don't talk to me like I'm nothing. You need help, Ethan snapped. This isn't normal. A long pause. Then Claire spoke in a tone neither of them had heard before, quiet, fractured, dangerous. Don't do this to me tonight. Ethan's reply was immediate. I'm already done. Another loud sound echoed, like someone stumbling backward. The recording became chaotic. Footsteps. Shouting. A sudden sharp noise that made Rebecca flinch. Then Claire's voice, broken and panicked. Stop, please, just listen to me. Ethan's breathing was fast now. Claire, I swear if you follow me again. A struggle erupted in the recording. Words overlapped, distorted by wind and interference. Nothing was fully clear, only fragments of fear and rage colliding. Then silence. Complete silence. For nearly 10 seconds. Rebecca's hands were shaking. Daniel stared at the device like it might explode. Then a final sound emerged. Claire, whispering. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. The recording cut off. No explanation. No resolution. Just darkness. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The truth they had built their defense on now felt unstable, fractured, incomplete. Because if this recording was real, then Claire's story was no longer fully consistent. And worse, neither was Ethan's. Within days, Detective Ryan Holt confirmed the recording was being analyzed by forensic audio specialists. The case, once considered closed, was officially reopened. Investigators returned to Millfield. Old files were pulled from archives. Witnesses were re-interviewed. The town, once certain of Claire Harper's innocence or guilt, was forced back into uncertainty. But Claire did not wait for answers. As questions mounted, her behavior changed. She stopped answering calls. Stopped going to work. Stopped speaking to neighbors. Rebecca noticed it first, an emptiness behind her daughter's eyes, as if something inside her had fractured under pressure. She's scared, Rebecca told Daniel. But Daniel didn't answer. Because fear was no longer the only possibility. Then, one morning, Claire was gone. Her bed untouched. Her phone left behind. No note. No explanation. Only the growing realization that whatever truth the recording had awakened, Claire had fled from it before anyone could ask her what really happened that night. Claire Harper vanished the same night investigators reopened Ethan Mercer's case. For 3 days, Millfield became a grid of searchlights, patrol cars, and unanswered questions. Police expanded their search into neighboring counties, checking abandoned buildings, bus stations, and remote properties. Rebecca barely slept during that time. Every hour without news felt heavier than the last. Then, on the 4th morning, a call came in. A fisherman reported a woman seen near an abandoned lakeside cabin several miles outside town. The structure had been unused for years, partially hidden by overgrown trees and collapsed fencing. Detective Holt moved quickly, but Rebecca moved faster. She arrived at the lake before the official search team. The air was damp and still, the water reflecting a grey sky that felt almost lifeless. The cabin stood at the edge of the shoreline, its wooden frame warped by time. Rebecca hesitated only once before stepping forward. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. And there, sitting on the floor against a wall, was Claire. She looked thinner. Worn down. Not the confident teenager from the trial, not the distant adult from recent years, but something in between. Someone cracked open by fear. "Mom," Claire whispered. Rebecca closed the door behind her. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Only the sound of water outside filled the silence. Then Rebecca finally asked, "Why here?" Claire's eyes dropped. "Because I didn't know where else to go." Rebecca slowly approached, her voice trembling. "They're looking for you." "I know." "Then you need to come back." Claire shook her head immediately. "No." The single word carried a finality that unsettled Rebecca more than anything she had heard in years. Outside, distant sirens could already be heard approaching. Rebecca knelt in front of her daughter. "Claire, whatever happened, we can fix this. We can." "No," Claire interrupted sharply. Her breathing became uneven. "You don't understand what they're going to find." Rebecca froze. "Then tell me," she said softly. For a long time Claire said nothing. Then, slowly, she began to speak. At first, her words were fragmented. Emotional. Unstable. But as she continued, the truth began to form. "I didn't go there just to talk," Claire said. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. "I needed him to listen to me," Claire continued. "I needed him to understand what he was doing to me." Her voice shook. "But he was already leaving. He was already gone from me before I even got there." Rebecca listened, unable to interrupt. Claire stared at the floor. "I followed him that night. I shouldn't have, but I did." The admission hung in the air. Rebecca's hands trembled. "What happened?" she whispered. Claire's breathing grew heavier. "We fought," she said. "It wasn't supposed to become what it became." Her eyes filled with tears. "He kept pushing me away. Like I meant nothing. Like everything we had was just disposable." Rebecca's voice broke. "Claire." "I didn't mean to kill him," Claire said suddenly, sharply, as if the words had been trapped inside her for years. Silence collapsed around them. Rebecca felt the world tilt. Claire continued, her voice lower now. "Everything after that. I was just trying to survive it. The questions, the police, the trial." She swallowed hard. "I said what I needed to say to protect myself." Rebecca stared at her, unable to breathe properly. "You manipulated the case," she whispered. Claire didn't deny it. Instead, she looked up. "I did what I had to do." Tears streamed down Rebecca's face. The daughter she had defended for a decade was no longer just a victim of suspicion or misunderstanding. She was something far more complicated. Something broken. Something responsible. Outside, footsteps approached the cabin. Voices called out her name. Claire suddenly grabbed Rebecca's hand tightly. "I need you to understand something," she said urgently. Rebecca shook her head. "Claire, they're here. We have to." "No," Claire interrupted. Her grip tightened. "There's something I never told anyone." Rebecca froze. Claire's eyes lifted, filled with fear and certainty. "And if they find out, everything changes again." The knock on the cabin door echoed through the silence. And Claire whispered the final words that shattered everything Rebecca thought she knew. "There is one truth nobody knows." The knock on the cabin door grew louder. Voices outside cut through the fragile silence, police calling Claire's name, ordering her to step out. Rebecca stood frozen between them. Claire still held her hand, but her grip was weaker now, trembling like everything else about her. "There's no more running," Rebecca whispered. Claire shook her head slowly. "That's what they think." Rebecca frowned. "Then what are you talking about?" Claire hesitated. For the first time since her confession began, she looked less like someone defending herself, and more like someone deciding how much destruction the truth would cause. Then she spoke. "Ethan wasn't the only one I lied about." The words landed like a second impact. Rebecca blinked. "What does that mean?" Claire's eyes dropped. "I didn't just manipulate him," she said quietly. "I manipulated everything around him." A heavy silence filled the cabin. Outside, footsteps shifted. The search team was close now. Claire continued, voice uneven. People think it was just me and Ethan. Just that night. Just a mistake that spiraled. She let out a bitter breath. But it started long before that. Rebecca's heart pounded. Claire, stop. But Claire couldn't stop anymore. Or wouldn't. There were things I said, she continued. Things I let people believe. About him. About me. About what he did to me. Her gaze lifted. I knew exactly how they would react. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. You mean the trial? Claire nodded faintly. I didn't tell the truth because I needed control. I needed them to see what I wanted them to see. Rebecca stepped back as if struck. You're saying you lied on the stand? Claire didn't answer directly. Instead she whispered, I shaped it. The words were worse than a confession. They were admission of design. Outside, a sharp voice ordered the door open. The handle rattled. Daniel's voice could be heard in the distance, calling Rebecca's name, confused, desperate. Inside, everything collapsed into a single unbearable moment. Rebecca stared at her daughter, trying to reconcile the child she raised with the person standing in front of her. You made us believe you were innocent, Rebecca said. Claire's eyes filled again. I made you believe what you needed to believe. The door burst open. Officers entered, weapons lowered but presence overwhelming. Claire didn't resist. She stood slowly, as if she had already accepted this ending long before it arrived. Rebecca instinctively reached for her again. But Claire stepped back. Mom, she said softly, you protected me because you thought I was worth protecting. Rebecca shook her head. You are. Claire gave a faint, broken smile. That's the problem. She turned toward the officers and allowed them to take her. Daniel appeared at the doorway seconds later, stopping when he saw her being led out. For a moment, no one spoke. Years of loyalty, fear, and denial condensed into a single unbearable scene. Claire was placed into a vehicle. And just like that, she was gone again. But this time, there was no mystery left in her absence. Only truth. Or what remained of it. The case reopened fully within days. Statements were re-examined. Evidence reanalyzed. The recording, the journal, the hidden files, all of it now part of an official investigation that could no longer be contained. Millfield watched as everything they once believed fractured in real time. Claire's confession changed everything. Not because it answered every question, but because it proved the answers had always been more complicated than anyone wanted to accept. Ethan Mercer was no longer simply a victim. Claire Harper was no longer simply a killer. And Daniel and Rebecca were no longer simply parents who believed in their daughter. They were people who had spent 10 years protecting a version of truth that never fully existed. Daniel barely spoke during the final proceedings. Rebecca stopped attending most hearings altogether. The emotional cost was immediate and irreversible. Their home felt emptier with each passing day. Not because Claire was gone, but because certainty had left with her. In the end, the court delivered a conclusion that satisfied no one. Justice delayed, partial, fragmented, but legally final. And still, it did not feel like an ending. Only exposure. Of something that had been rotting beneath the surface for years. One evening, weeks after Claire's transfer, Rebecca returned to the attic alone. She opened the old wooden chest. It was empty except for dust, except for something she had missed before. A folded letter pressed beneath the lining. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar. No name. No date. Only a message. A reference to another incident. Another disappearance. Another name she didn't recognize. Rebecca read it once. Then again. Her breath caught. Because if this was real, if even half of it was true, then Ethan Mercer had never been the end of the story. Only the beginning. And somewhere out there, another truth was still waiting to be uncovered.